Well, I think that's a good cue. Should we get started, folks? All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome and good evening. This is Chai Hack Night. Welcome to our remote live stream now at our new and improved 7 p.m. start time. I'm really excited to have tonight's presentation and welcome back to Chai Hack Night, Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle, along with several of her colleagues, Tom Lynch, the Chief Information Officer, Hema Sundaram, Chief Technology Officer, and Dessa Jipolo, Chief Data Officer. So we're going to be hearing a really amazing presentation tonight on the intersection of racial equity, data, and technology in Cook County's response to COVID-19. But before we get to that, there's a couple of things we always like to do first, which are some welcome and some announcements. I'm Derek Eater. I'm president of Chai Hack Night, and I'll be co-hosting tonight's event along with my fellow board member, Ryan Spencer. Ryan, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm also a board member here at Chai Hack Night.
All right. So before we get to the presentation, there's just a few things to note. We will be doing some announcements in just a moment. Ryan, did you want to tell folks a little bit about how the presentation Q&A is going to work?
Yeah, so after our presentation, we will have a Q&A. You can use the YouTube live chat feature to present your questions. But do keep in mind that we do have a code of conduct, so we will be monitoring that chat. So just please keep that in mind that your questions are respectful of the presentation. And then I guess we can also, we're gonna also have some announcements as well as breakout groups later. So there will be a post live stream Zoom call that you can join where we will go through sort of our traditional Chai Hack Night agenda, starting with introductions as well as announcing breakout groups later.
Awesome. Well, shall we get into announcements then?
Yeah, let's get started.
Cool. Want to go ahead and kick us off?
Okay, so this is a very short list of some of our upcoming announcements. Now, next Tuesday, we will have our second discussion on actions towards racial justice. So this is going to be a continuation of the discussion that we had on the 400th episode of Chai Hack Night. Now, there will be a breakout group tonight where we're going to kind of discuss sort of what we as Chai Hack Night community members can do towards racial equity prior to this June 30th event. There will also be no Chai Hack Night for 4th of July, so please keep that in mind. And then the following week, we will have a presentation on Chicago's personal protective equipment market, and as well as the Lyric Opera Chicago's Empowerment Youth Program. So those are some of the exciting events coming up at Chai Hack Night.
All right, so next announcement. So we like to, obviously there's a lot of news that happens every day now these days, but there are a few ones that we wanted to call to folks' attention because they relate to what Chai Hack Night cares about: open data, transparency, and accountability. And so a news announcement that was announced about 5 days ago is that the Illinois Supreme Court ruled to the Chicago Police Department to maintain records that were older than 5 years, to maintain them and not allow them to be destroyed. So this is a big win. This was actually something that was a big push by a former Chai Hack Night presentation from Invisible Institute. If anyone's familiar with Jamie Calvin, they've presented here before. So that's a big victory for open data and transparency. And then actually at the next slide, an example of what can be done with that kind of data is this is something that I saw yesterday, is that a group of folks who are pushing for getting cops out of CPS pulled those misconduct reports and were able to match them up to the schools and the officers associated and posted to those schools. So you can actually see this picture here shows all the schools with police officers assigned to them. And then the heat map shows the number of misconduct complaints for each of those officers. So that's just an example of one way that this data can be used and can continue to be used now that it's not going to be destroyed. Do you want to do the next announcement, Ryan?
Yeah, so for, there we go. I think we're missing, okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, so your census is very important. So if you have not already done so, please, please, please fill out your census. It determines how funding is allocated in your community. It's also your representation in government. So tell your friends, your family to do the same, but this is super important to get counted.
Cool. You want to do this one too, since you'll be hosting it?
So I will actually, so after this, there will be a what we call a post Zoom call. So this is going to be the chance that we're going to go through our traditional Shy Hack Night agenda. We'll also have time for doing some intros. That way we can get to know each other a little bit better. And then afterwards, we're going to go announce the breakout group. So if you want to attend that breakout group I mentioned earlier, or maybe one that's going to be hosted, please make sure you show up to that post live stream Zoom.
Awesome. All right, well, now I think we're ready to move on to our feature presentation. So we'll turn everything over to our featured presenter, Cook County Board President, Toni Preckwinkle. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you tonight. I wish clearly that we were all together in person, but not to be. I want to congratulate you on hosting your 400th Hack Night and getting your official 501c3 not-for-profit status. I'm approaching a milestone myself. December 10th will be my 10th anniversary as Cook County Board President. We've made a lot of strides in that time, but it's safe to say that the pace of change increased with the pandemic. We have many departments that I've worked very hard on with this crisis to serve the public. In technology, the Bureau of Technology, or BOT as we call it, had engineers working long hours to provide internet access to temporary shelters outside the hospitals. We had a service desk staff that were, and field techs that were issuing laptops and secure network connections to thousands of our employees. The Bureau of Technology helped our employees move rapidly to working from home in a matter of days. Many of them had their first Microsoft Teams video meeting from the safety of their own homes. Our Technology Bureau also provided telecommunications infrastructure at Cook County Jail, so our detainees could have video visitations after physical distancing policies were enacted. BOT also enabled our Cook County emergency court hearings to run virtually. And they helped offices under the president and other branches of county government safely provide vital services online. The departments of data analytics and geographic information systems, GIS, work to get vital data to health professionals, first responders, and the public. The data shows that the impacts of natural disasters, economic downturns, and health crises do not fall equally on all of us. Using data science and geographic analysis, we see where impacts are not equitably distributed and provide that information to county agencies, other government entities, nonprofits, and residents to prioritize our resources where help is needed most. The Cook County Medical Examiner's Office and our Bureau of Technology created a way for residents to see the lives lost to this pandemic and the disproportionate effects the pandemic is having on people of color in Cook County. To help us respond to the crisis and plan our recovery efforts, GIS and data analytics adapted a U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention measure called the Social Vulnerability Index, SVI, to create a detailed map of potential impacts of COVID-19 on the different communities of Cook County. Social vulnerability is a phrase that CDC uses to describe the vulnerability of a community to human suffering and financial loss in the event of a disaster. Factors that the CDC believes contribute to social vulnerability include poverty, lack of transportation access, language barriers, and others. The index is a measure of the presence of these combined factors in a community. Our Department of Emergency Management and Regional Security uses this SVI, Social Vulnerability Index map, to prioritize personal protective equipment distribution to communities that need it most. There are countless other examples of county offices which have stepped up in the time of crisis. We want to save some time for your questions, so let me talk briefly about what comes next for Cook County government. We're taking an equitable approach to our long-term recovery efforts, and we've adopted a new set of priorities to guide our work. This work will align with the work already underway through the policy roadmap, the 5-year strategic plan for offices under the president. Given the exceptional circumstances in this emergency, we commit to initiatives that provide support in areas where Cook County has authority and resources to have the greatest impact, prioritize support for the county's most vulnerable populations by using a racial equity lens. And by the way, let me say, you know, the infection rates in the African-American community for the pandemic are 3 times what they are in the white community. And in the Latinx community, they're 4 times the infection rate of the white community. So when we talk about vulnerable populations, there's clearly a racial context that we're talking about. We want to maintain continuity of essential public services for residents and businesses throughout Cook County. We want to coordinate efforts with other units of government to strategically leverage shared resources. And finally, we focus on suburban Cook County, which has substantial needs, but limited resources. Last month, we welcomed our inaugural Director of Equity and Inclusion, Denise Barreto. Denise is charged with coordinating and integrating racial equity principles into all of our county operations, projects, and services. She'll lead efforts already underway, galvanizing internal employee engagement and external community engagement to inform policies and practices that advance racial equity. Speaking of equity, I know one issue that's very near and dear to the Chi-Hacknight community is digital equity. I'm grateful that we can meet here virtually, but this live stream, like so many events these days, is only accessible to you if you have high-speed internet. And 25%, a quarter of Cook County residents lack high-speed internet. 43% of the unconnected Illinois households are in Cook County. 17% of Black and Latinx households lack a computer. And there are as many unconnected homes in Cook County outside of Chicago as there are in all of rural Illinois. While digital equity mattered before, it matters even more now. Students are languishing at home, unable to complete their homework without laptops, and missing Zoom classes because they don't have high bandwidth. Families struggle to apply for unemployment because they can't fill out job applications on their phones. We can't allow a quarter of Cook County to fall further behind as we recover digitally during the next phase of this health crisis. That's why we've created CODE, the Council on Digital Equity. And this Cook County initiative has been charged with overseeing our efforts to advance digital equity. CODE is focused on 3 primary areas, which will be familiar to all of you who watched the Hack Night talk a few weeks ago by Angela Seifer from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, who is an advisor to CODE. Digital infrastructure, that's the first one. It's not just residents in Cook County's broadband deserts who can't afford high-speed internet. It's not available there at any price. So it's even if you had the money, you couldn't get access. We must build the infrastructure, that is fiber optic networks. We hope to work with our partners in the governor's office and municipal leaders of the county to do the hard work of bringing high-speed fiber backbone to underserved communities. So first is digital infrastructure. Second is digital proficiency. Access to high-speed internet isn't helpful to those who aren't able to use it. As everything from banking to job hunting moves to more exclusively being online, as my daughter tells me all the time, all our residents need the skills to ensure that they are not excluded from the economy. Through the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership and other entities, we hope to provide learning opportunities to make sure no one is left behind. And third, digital well-being. The third thing you need to improve to accomplish digital equity is a computer in the home. Although costs for consumer electronics have come down considerably, computers are still beyond the reach of many low-income families. We hope to be able to work with partners to provide low-cost or free devices to residents who need them, and especially to our student population. We know that teachers begin assigning homework that requires a computer as early as 3rd grade. This program is still in its formative stage, and we don't have a lot of concrete details yet, but if you have any ideas or suggestions, please send them our way. And now my team and I will be happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I believe, Ryan, do you want to take the first question here?
Yeah, let's start with the first one. So a recently released report in New York shows that the number of people killed by police activity is more than double what was officially reported. Will there be a similar study by the medical examiners to review deaths in Cook County due to police activity?
The medical examiner is not charged with accusing people of crimes. Their job is to do autopsies. So they do autopsies and they provide autopsy reports. And those reports are available to our prosecutors and our police officers alike. And it's the obligation of others outside the medical examiner's office to bring charges if those are appropriate.
I'll take the second one. So for years, local advocates like BYP 100 have requested the deletion of the gang database because of its role in the surveillance played in falsely targeting and profiling minorities. Do you see the deletion of the gang database as part of proposed changes involving Cook County and police?
Well, first of all, we eliminated the gang database a year ago in the sheriff's office. So the county's already taken this action. Needless to say, we found that people on the gang database were disproportionately Black and brown. Not only could you not figure out how you got on there, you could never get off, even if you were deceased. So we decided that it was, in my view, an unconstitutional violation of people's civil rights. Now, for whatever reason, our commissioners voted to get rid of it. But the city has a gang database, and those of you who live in the city ought to be advocating for its abolition as well.
Okay, so you were recently quoted in the Sun-Times as saying we need to dramatically reduce the amount we spend on law enforcement. What could that look like now and in the coming years?
Well, let me just say, I was an alderman for 20 years, and I work closely with our local police forces. But in this country, unfortunately, our police forces are often agents of oppression as opposed to public servants. And, you know, I talked to a number of police officers, particularly African-American police officers, who'd worked in various districts across the city. And they were quite clear that their instructions were different in white communities than they were in Black and brown communities. You know, the emphasis was placed on public service, that is serving the public in white communities, was not the same emphasis that was made in Black and brown neighborhoods. And, you know, I think it's really important that the police are public servants and not, as I said, agents of oppression. So we've got to figure out how we're going to provide safety and security in communities without relying so much on the police. I mean, and one of the ways we can do that is to invest in communities that are struggling. You know, if you look at the communities that have the highest violence, they're the same communities that have the highest unemployment rates, that have the lowest educational attainment levels. They're food deserts. You know, access to healthcare is difficult. So basically, struggling communities are also violent communities. And to the extent that we can invest in communities and lift them up, we'll have fewer problems with violence and fewer problems that require law enforcement. But let me just say, I mean, one of the problems we have with our present police department is that we don't solve the most serious crimes. The clearance rate for murders in the city of Chicago is less than 20%. And for shootings, it's less than 10%. But that means, you know, you got 9 chances out of 10 if you shoot at somebody, but getting away with it. And you have, you know, 8 chances out of 10 of getting away with murdering somebody. And everybody knows that. And what that leads to, of course, is vigilante justice. If you know that the person who killed your brother or your friend or your father is never going to be brought to justice by the legal system, the temptation, of course, is to take the law into your own hands. So we have a kind of a domino effect. You know, every person who shot, every murder that takes place, there are ripple effects that go throughout the communities. And nationally, we solve about 63%, I'm sorry, we clear about 63% of the murder cases. And if we could just get to the national average, forget being better than the national average, I think we'd have considerably safer communities, even if we didn't invest in them economically, which we have to do as well. You know, the School of Social Service Administration at the University of Chicago has some folks, and I'm sorry, I can't remember their names, who are doing this work on $1 million blocks in the city of Chicago, where we spend $1 million per block incarcerating or detaining the residents of that block. Now, if we spend $1 million on every block in a low-income neighborhood in the city of Chicago, investing in the education of the children, investing in economic development activities, investing in employment training activities, we wouldn't be spending, $1 million at the Illinois Department of Corrections. So we have to both have a more effective police force, and we have to invest in communities and not so much in police.
Great, thank you. Derek, do you want to take the next one, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can take the next one. So continuing on the topic of police, the president of the Chicago Police Union indicated he'd use chokeholds even if the city bans them. What do statements like that do the confidence of policymakers that insist that reform is the best path forward for the Chicago Police Department?
Forget policymakers. Let's talk about ordinary residents of our city. I mean, it reflects so badly on Chicago police officers that they chose someone like this to be their leader. It's profoundly discouraging to me as a resident of the city. And I'm sure it's discouraging to any resident who thinks about it. What is this? They're saying that it's okay to use these extraordinary measures to subdue people that might lead to their death, and that's fine. I mean, I don't know. As I said, I'm at a loss for words, and that's not often the case. But, in Minneapolis, the head of the FOP made similar inflammatory and disgusting statements, and the state Federation of Labor basically said that he ought to be replaced. So organized labor in Minnesota took a stand against this kind of outrageous, authoritarian, oppressive approach to policing. And I think the labor movement in the city of Chicago and the county of Cook ought to be similarly outraged by this kind of comment and speak up about it, as ordinary citizens should and other elected officials should. This is disgraceful. There's nothing else you can say about it.
So kind of pivoting towards school. So the Chicago School Board will decide tomorrow whether to terminate a $33 million contract between CPS and CPD. So should Chicago Public Schools cancel this contract? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I've spoken up about the fact that we need to invest more in social workers and psychologists and nurses to support our students and staff, and less in the police. Unfortunately, some of our public schools have booking rooms. So the school is a direct pipeline into the criminal justice system. And that's profoundly disturbing. And our educational institutions shouldn't be providing a path for young people to enter the criminal justice system. I was a teacher for 10 years, and kids screw up, they fight, bad things happen. Okay. But you handle them within the school and you impose discipline within the school setting. You don't send the kids to the juvenile temporary detention center, So I think that principals need a close working relationship with the police, and they need to be calling the police for help and support when they need it. But that doesn't mean you need police officers in the school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can take the next one. So as you noted in your remarks, over a quarter of our residents lack access to high-speed internet. How do we close that gap? Is it the role of internet service providers to do that? Or is it something that requires the government to step in and provide something like municipal broadband?
Well, we have a Council on Digital Equity, which is working on these issues. But my personal opinion is that, this ought to be a public utility. We shouldn't be relying on private companies that have a profit motive and therefore may exclude certain communities or certain parts of our county from internet access because it's not profitable to provide it there, from access to broadband. So how our Council of Digital Equity will come down on this, I can't say. But my personal view is that we need to be sure, in the present environment, not having access to broadband, not having a computer in your house is a disability, basically. It impairs your ability to learn, to apply for work, to pursue an education. Okay, so everybody should have access to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to figure out how we're going to do that. And that may mean that government has to finance fiber optic cabling, connections throughout the county. And then the government, runs the fiber optic network as a public utility. I mean, after all, broadband isn't something that came into being yesterday, right? I mean, so the private entities have been doing this have a long time to do it, and they haven't done it. Okay, so I think that means they're incapable or unwilling. In either case, everybody should have access to broadband, so government's got to figure out how to provide it.
Absolutely. So another question we got is that it's been reported that 1 in 6 COVID cases in Cook County can be traced back to the Cook County Jail. So what more could have been done to protect people, and what is being done now?
Well, first of all, jails are congregate settings like nursing homes. And so they're petri dishes. You're going to have terrible problems in jails because it's very difficult to provide physical distancing in a jail. So one of the first things we did was work with all of the actors, and I want to commend Chief Judge Tim Evans, State's Attorney Kim Fox, Public Defender Amy Campanelli, Sheriff Tom Dart, and Clerk Dorothy Brown, all of whom worked together to try to get people accused of non-violent crimes out of the jail so that we could single cell people and enable more physical distancing. And we got the jail population down to 4,033, which is the lowest it's been in decades. Now, as the county opened up a little more and people were outside, we've had more people arrested. Some of that is protest related. A lot of it is violence related. There are now about 4,550, something like that, people in the jail. So there are about 500 more people than there were at the height of the pandemic. But we've done a lot of work to, as I said, to reduce the jail population so that we can have more physical distancing. And the present situation is that the cases in the jail are people who are coming into the jail now, not the present jail population. Now, we can't, I'm sorry, I don't agree with the people that say that we shouldn't have any jails. The people who that 4,000 population that was in the jail, those are people accused of very serious crimes. You know, murder, attempted murder, rape. Okay, I mean, those people should be in jail, I'm sorry. But the question is, should people who are accused of low-level drug offenses or, you know, people like George Floyd accused of passing counterfeit, you know, $20 bills, or people who aren't paying their child support, or, you know, people who are accused of shoplifting, should those people be in jail? I don't think so, under any circumstances, and surely not in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm very grateful to all of the actors who worked together to reduce the jail population down to a number where we could single cell more people and practice the physical distancing that mitigates the impact of the pandemic. You know, as I said, it's very hard in a congregate setting. It's why we've had so many deaths in nursing homes. It's very hard in a congregate setting to handle a pandemic like this. But I think, you know, the sheriff and his staff have worked very hard, along with our Department of Public Health and our health and hospital system, to deal with the pandemic in the jail. And as I said, we're at the point now where the cases in the jail are not the existing detainee population, but new folks coming in. And we have the ability to quarantine them for 14 days. And I don't think there's anybody in the jail now in the hospital, in any of our hospitals. So the sheriff and his staff have managed to contain the epidemic in the jail.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, so well, I'll kind of pivot towards, I guess, back towards racial equity. So what will Cook County look like in 2025? Thinking of racial equity and advancements made in that area.
Well, let me just give an example of what we're doing now. We got money from the CARES Act. That's the federal stimulus bill that provided support to hospitals so they could deal with the COVID pandemic, provided support to local units of government like ours that were running health and hospital systems and running jails. We got, I think, 429 million, 430 million, something like that. A lot of it we're spending ourselves. At one point in the pandemic, half the hospital beds in the hospital were occupied by people who had COVID-19. So we had some very significant impacts on our healthcare system as a result of the pandemic. And of course, we've talked about the jail and the impact there. So although a lot of the resources we are using ourselves as county government, we decided that we would share some with the cities, towns, and villages within Cook County. a little bit less than a third of the money that we're going to share, it's 51 million, will go to cities, towns, and villages on a per capita basis, about $6 per person, to help them with COVID-related expenses. So that's 15 million. 36 million, a little bit more than 2/3, will be apportioned on the basis of what amounts to a social vulnerability index. That is, those communities that have the greatest need because of poverty, greatest need because of, we know that the pandemic has hit Black and Latinx communities harder than it has white communities. So it'll go to communities where there are high populations that are particularly vulnerable, either by virtue of their race or by their poverty. Right now, looking toward the end of the year, this money has to be spent by, I think by May of next year. We're immediately allocating resources on the basis of need, not simply on the basis of population. Would have been the easiest thing to do, just take the money and divide it up according to the population of every city, town, or village. We made an allocation on a per capita basis, but the overwhelming majority of the money is going to go to the communities that need it the most. So that's the kind of, what we've said is, we're going to use the racial equity lens to look at how we make investments, our programs, our policies, everything. So this is an example. And I'm grateful to our Chief Financial Officer, Amar Ritsky, and his team for the good work they did in calculating how we should manage this distribution.
Great, thank you. So I think I want to acknowledge that there are several members of your team that are here as well. And this might be a question that they would be able to answer as well. So what is the history of Cook County's data and technology team? Are there any notable projects that were worked on over the years?
All right, I'm going to ask Tom Lynch to answer that question and maybe to bring on some members of his team to speak to it as well. Tom?
Muted. Thank you, Madam President. I could speak extensively on this topic, so I will restrain my temptation to do so and give the highest of the high points. I'm joined by Hema Sundaram, who is our CTO, our Chief Technology Officer, who was instrumental in several of those large projects. So I'll hit the highlights, and then I think Hema's best equipped to tell you about the projects themselves. So if I pick two things that are fundamentally different about the technology landscape in Cook County today than from when the president took office, they are: one, that we have enterprise applications that are in use across all of the county offices. Unlike the city of Chicago, where essentially everybody ultimately works for the mayor, that's not true in the structure of Cook County government. We have multiple elected officials who each have autonomy in how they run and operate their respective offices. So getting all those offices to agree to utilize technology together is sometimes a difficult proposition. I like to put it that we have to use carrots because we don't have sticks. So getting everybody to move to a standard back office application like the Oracle ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning application, is a project that had been contemplated for many years but not successfully implemented. We were able to do it about 3 years ago. It's now in use both for payroll and HR and benefits management and accounts payable and accounts receivable and inventory, general ledger, purchasing, pretty much everything that involves a transaction with people or vendors is now all run through the same system. It replaced 8 systems that were doing the same thing before it was in place. So that, from a software standpoint, that's probably one that I would point to. And then on the networking side, the infrastructure side, the county's network was woefully deficient. It was too slow. It didn't connect to many facilities, and it didn't have a lot of Wi-Fi available. So Hema, feel free to put in more details.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, as Tom mentioned, our network needed was in very much need of upgrade. So over the years, every year we've made more points to connect the Cook County. So the Cook County is basically all the offices are connected, and the bandwidth, we monitor bandwidth constantly, and the bandwidth is, we're not even close to 100%. So that's something we continuously work on, our infrastructure. If I may, one other critical project that we worked on is consolidation, because there are many IT departments across the Cook County. So each agency has an IT department of varying sizes. So we did a study to see how we can bring efficiencies by consolidating all the agencies. And we've implemented some consolidation around service desk. And now we are looking into further consolidating infrastructure as well, data centers and other areas.
Okay, I kind of have a question that may tie into that a little bit, but after appointing the CIO, so the Chief Information Officer in 2015, what are some of the initiatives that was created to help advance Cook County technology infrastructures? And then a follow-up, so there can be disparities in access and policing and whatnot between the cities and the suburbs. So has any data so far highlighted any disparities between Chicago and the suburbs that require different responses?
I'll defer to Tom.
Right. So the policing strategies is a little out of my bailiwick. I don't know that I can answer that question. I can speak to the disparity of connectivity, particularly in the south suburbs. As the president mentioned, the major providers really have very limited market in those areas, presumably because they're less profitable. So essentially, if you're in the center of the city, particularly in the north side of the city, you have lots of options, lots of providers, and you could do things with cable access or Wi-Fi access, lots of different plans you could pick. And if you then go to say like a Harvey on the south side, you would find that if you want high-speed internet access at your house, you can't get it. And again, I believe the president said at any price, and that's true, because the last mile connectivity is so expensive that it's essentially prohibitive. And if your neighbors are not demanding the same service, then it's unlikely that those providers are going to extend to your block and making it effectively impossible for any one homeowner to get there. So what do you do about that? Well, again, as the president mentioned, it's time, I think, for government to step in and help. Now, if the providers want to meet us halfway, I think that's a good thing too. I think most important is making sure that the residents get those services that they need. How we get it is perhaps less important, but so far, I think it's government that's going to push the way. It's government that's going to make that service available.
Thank you. So this question is for Madam President. So you mentioned bringing people to justice. So what does justice look like to you? What is your vision for Cook County's approach to criminal justice?
Well, first of all, I've said repeatedly that we live in a profoundly racist country, and nowhere is that more evident than in the criminal justice system. About 26% of the population of the county is Latinx, about 24% is African American. The population in our jail is 86% Black and brown, mostly Black. And although the city of Chicago is half the population of the county, 80% of the people in our jail are from the city of Chicago. Okay, so Chicago is disproportionately represented in our jail, and Black and brown people, particularly Black people, are disproportionately represented in our jail. And that's a function of hyper-policing of Black and brown neighborhoods by the Chicago Police Department. And they put people in our criminal justice system who would never be put there in the white community. So I'll tell you a little story. A Latinx woman who I supported for judge came to see me at one point, and she was assigned to 51st and Wentworth, to one of the branch courts there. And she said, I want you to know that they're putting our kids, and she meant Black and brown young men, into the criminal justice system for things like shooting dice on the sidewalk or having, a joint in your pocket. Now, I'm not saying that shooting dice on the sidewalk is a good idea or smoking dope is a good idea. But the fact of the matter is they don't arrest white kids for that kind of stuff. It's what I call petty antisocial behavior. And if you're Black or brown, you're much more likely to be put in the criminal justice system for it than white kids who never get put in the criminal justice system for that. So our criminal justice system operates as a tool of oppression of Black and brown people. I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to say, here's another fact. Okay. We have 5% of the world's population in the United States. We have 25% of the people in the entire world in prison. Okay, now unless you think Americans are more likely to be criminals than people elsewhere in the world, we're doing something terribly wrong. And part what drives that 25% of the people in the world in prison is the level at which we imprison Black and brown people. So, as I said, this is a profoundly racist country, and nowhere is that more evident than our criminal justice system. And here in Cook County, we've worked hard with the actors who I've mentioned before to reduce the number of people who await the disposition of their cases in jail. And local jails are places where people are detained who are awaiting trial. Prison is for people who've been convicted. The jails are for people who are accused. Actually, 14% of the people in our jail are serving a sentence, and 86% are awaiting trial. In our country, you're presumed innocent until proven guilty. So we detain people in our jail until their trial. And what we're trying to do is detain only those accused of violent crimes, rather than people accused of petty antisocial behavior and a variety of nonviolent crimes. So, what are we doing? Well, as I said, we've been trying to reduce the jail population. 2013, the jail population varied between 10 and 11,000 on a daily basis. And as you heard, we got it down to about 4,000 during the pandemic with the great support of the Bail Project and the Chicago Bond Fund, as well as the collaboration and cooperation of all the public safety stakeholders. It's ratcheted up due mostly to the violence and a little bit to the protests. But it's still at 4,500, which is a significant reduction from the 10 or 11,000 daily average that it was in 2013. So we've made a lot of progress. We've got a lot of progress to go. But you know, we receive people who are arrested locally. So as a county, the local police forces send people to us. The city of Chicago sends people to us. And again, they send an astonishing number of Black and brown people to us, many of whom would not be arrested if they were white.
Thank you for speaking frankly on that question. So we're gonna kind of pivot back to something that was mentioned earlier. So a question asked about the medical examiner. So it's been left to news organizations that has to undertake an expensive and lengthy public records fight, so that we know that 92 people were shot and killed by CPD between 2010 and 2015. Or that
I lost you there for a little bit. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, it's fine. I'll go a little slower as well. So talking back to the medical examiner. So it's been reports by news organizations have to undertake the expensive and lengthy public records fight to know that 92 people were shot and killed by Chicago Police Department between 2010 and 2015. Or that another 108 people were killed as a result of police pursuits and crashes in the Chicago area between 2006 and 2016. So does the medical examiner or another county office have the remit to take on the responsibility to count the cause of these deaths?
Well, as I said, the medical examiner's office performs autopsies and they determine a cause of death. As to whether anyone gets charged, that's a matter of the local police force and the state's attorney.
And then,
Oh, I can take the next one.
okay. Yeah.
And this might be a question that some of the data and tech folks might want to jump in on as well. What progress has Cook County made using GIS maps to show investment in individual blocks or zip codes? Is there any resource on the county's website to show this?
Dessa should definitely answer that question.
Good. Dessa.
Hello, everybody. I had to unmute myself. I realized I was talking just to myself and that wasn't helpful. So thank you, Tom. Again, my name is Dessa Gipolo. I'm the Chief Data Officer. And one, GIS, they have been doing a lot of work and pushing out a lot of really helpful, actionable information throughout the pandemic. Two of the things that have been mentioned, and I want to make sure that are highlighted. are the Social Vulnerability Index, the SVI, and the medical examiner application that allows people to filter down to see who is being impacted mostly by COVID-19. When it comes to block level investments, that is a project through the policy roadmap that the president mentioned earlier. Part of that is using our internal data, GIS data, where our investment data from various agencies, and then figuring out how to map it. So right now, we don't have anything currently going on, but it is something that we are looking at through the policy roadmap initiative, and making sure that any data that we do produce is actionable and is shareable.
Thank you. I'm always grateful for your help, Tessa. Other questions?
We do have a few more. So here's one. So for the first part of the code initiative, building infrastructure, what companies is the county working with to build it? And how do we ensure that they stay in the community and help maintain it?
Okay, so first of all, we just formed our Council on Digital Equity. And while the infrastructure is the first thing we talked about, we're not there in terms of engaging people to actually do the work. We're trying to figure out how we're going to get the money to do what needs to be done. Previously in my administration, we made an investment as we were doing highway construction in fiber optic cables in the right of way at the perimeter of the highway. So we could extend fiber optic access down to some of our southern suburbs. But we have to figure out how to, first of all, we have to be sure that we've got an accurate map of where our deserts are, broadband deserts, and then try to figure out how we're going to be sure that we get fiber optic cable to those parts of the county that don't have broadband access. And we're just beginning. I'm gonna have to be honest with you. So it's not a matter of who the contractors are we're working with or how we're gonna be sure that community contractors have access to it. We're not anywhere near that. We're trying to figure out where the needs are and who we're gonna get to help us with the financial support that we need to make this work. Because the county can't do it all by itself.
I can take the next one. So currently COVID-19 data about where COVID-19 deaths happen requires a FOIA, or Freedom of Information request, to Cook County. And the data that comes from FOIA is especially messy and only accessible to those who can spend significant effort cleaning it up. What efforts exist to make this information more accessible without too many FOIA requests, excessive FOIA requests, and without excessive cleanup work by the folks requesting them?
Well, I can't answer that question, honestly. Tom, do you have any information about, I thought that the information from the medical examiner was available to people.
So there's a nuance here. We do show the location where the case was reported, but that's not necessarily going to be a home address. It depends on the particular situation of the particular patient. And that will be highly variable. The other thing is that not all cases go through the Cook County Medical Examiner, so they're not going to have access to all data. I think the question, if I heard correctly, was about Chicago. Was that right? Yeah. Okay.
It was Cook County. Yeah.
Oh, it's the Cook County. Okay.
Yeah.
So perhaps counterintuitively, there are other public health agencies in Cook County for Oak Park and for Evanston, as well as the city of Chicago. So there's nuance depending on case to case as to what is being reported and by which agency.
Yes, we have a Department of Public Health in Cook County and a Department of Public Health in the city of Chicago. They have different responsibilities, geographic responsibilities. Our Cook County Department of Public Health focuses only on the suburbs, and the city, of course, is the city. In addition to which, we have departments of public health in Evanston, Oak Park, Stickney. Is that it? Those three? So
that's correct.
Well, we have in the county, we have, 5 departments of public health that gather data. So it's a little complicated in terms of getting accurate information.
I will say, Madam President, if I could, that those departments of public health are coordinating with each other as well as with the state, that is the Illinois Department of Public Health, to try to improve the coordination of data sharing across those agencies, particularly as we all are beginning our contact tracing initiatives. So while I can't give you a timeline as to when that will happen, I can say that all those actors are actively talking right now about how that data could be shared, even though they're reported separately by each of them.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that they don't cooperate and collaborate. It's just that we've got a number of data sets that are out there. Other questions?
Yeah, we do have a few more for you still. So can you comment on Chicago Police's decision to remove the Chicago arrest database, especially in the context of understanding how COVID-19 spreads throughout prisons and outside?
Arrest database?
Arrest database.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Not sure what that, are you not sure what that's referring to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm responsible for the county, but the city police department is the mayor. So I don't know, but I can't speak to that.
Got it. That's fine. So we'll just pivot to another question. So what technical...
Off so easy, okay.
Yeah, I wish I could communicate with that person, but I can't at the moment. So I'm not sure what they meant either. But so what are the technical skills / software is commonly used? So what technical skills / software is commonly used in your agency, and what sort of preparation would you recommend for those looking to become public sector data specialists? So maybe this is for you or someone on your team.
I definitely am not the person to answer this question. I have help every time I do one of these things. So I'll have to defer to Tom.
I think Dessa's got this one.
Dessa, very good. Okay, Dessa.
This is my second favorite subject. So I care a lot about empowerment and skill building and who is coming on to do data analytics work. I think that in the public sector in particular, we have to be very intentional about the work that we do and the impact that it has. And we have to do as much as we can to reduce bias in all of the data that we're doing, because it is used in such a wide array of activities. It is used by other governmental agencies. It's used in civic tech. It's used to inform decision making. It's informed on where our money is being spent. So the folks that are doing that work, we need to make sure that they are equipped to do that work. When it comes to skills, I usually look for Jacks and Jills of all trades. I'm not necessarily looking at the best Python coder. I'm not looking for the best SQL writer. I'm not looking for somebody who knows COBOL per se. Really what I'm looking for, and what I think that we should all be looking for, are data folks who come in and question things. They ask why. They have very logical minds of thinking from not just the start, but to the end. So how do we get there? And how do we take some of these kind of nefarious processes and codify them and make them repeatable and scalable? So it's a long way of saying that I'm technical wise, we're looking for folks who have a little bit of SQL, a little bit of Python, a little bit of Excel, but it's more important that you're a good communicator and that you're able to bridge that technical divide between our customer base internally with agencies who may not be the most technical, but we want to make sure that we're speaking the same language so nobody is talking past the other person, because with challenges that we're working to solve are really big and really gnarly, and that we need as many people who are thinking critically about how we get from point A to point B as possible. So it doesn't answer necessarily the technical skills, but really it's that mindset of here is a challenge and let's do everything we can to solve it with data analytics skill sets sprinkled in.
If I could add one thing to what Dessa's saying. First off, if anything, I think that Dessa is understating the scope and the magnitude of the change that she has brought to the county in just a very short tenure here. Dessa is the county's first chief data officer and has really established the program with a small team, mostly her work. So a lot of what you've heard us talk about tonight is really due to one person, and you're looking at her. So thank you very much, Dessa, for that. I also would like to let you know, as potential candidates interested in working for the county, that this is not just about offices under the president. What's happened in 2 years is that 3 elected offices now have chief data officer positions because policymakers realize the criticality of having accurate data to make drive decisions. So if you're interested in pursuing work in the public sector, I'm sure both Dessa and myself would love to talk to you. So reach out to us separately. Happy to talk more.
Thank you. I did get a clarification on that last question. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer it, but regarding the Chicago Police's arrest database, they meant arrest API, which is a way for accessing that information. So I'm not sure if do you have any comment on the removal of that system?
I don't understand it, so I shouldn't talk about it.
I do understand it, but we don't use that data. It's
Okay.
possible that it's within the sheriff's office. As the president explained,
Right.
each of those elected offices have different core focuses. So it is possible that that data is shared, but I can't speak to it. I can tell you the offices of the president do not leverage that API.
Okay. I think we have one last question, and timing works out well because we're at about time. What efforts exist between local city government, Chicago and Cook County and others to invest more in socially vulnerable communities? And what can we do as citizens and residents to support these efforts?
Well, first of all, let me just say, Cook County's responsibility is suburban Cook in terms of investing in communities. And so, I mean, the federal resources that come to us, for example, community development block grant resources, home resources, a variety of funding streams come to suburban Cook. The city gets its own separate allocation. So a lot of our dollars come from the federal government and can only be used in suburban Cook. But we are looking through entities like the Cook County Land Bank at ways we can be supportive of communities within the city. And you know, we've got a lot of work to do in terms of investing in communities that are challenged according to our own social vulnerability index, SVI. That's got to be the work of our lifetime. I mean, if you paid attention to the WBEZ report earlier this month about what banks are doing in our neighborhoods, you know, there are several banks, Chase comes to mind, where they invested, for every dollar they invested in white communities, they invested 12 cents in Black communities. Can't remember the number for the Latinx community, but it was similarly dismal. So it's not just government investments. I mean, governments are a small part really of the investments that are made in our communities. A lot of them are made by private financial institutions like banks in mortgages for families that are looking for homes. And it's not just Lincoln Park. There was more money invested in Lincoln Park than all of the Black communities in the city by the banks in this town. Okay, and Lincoln Park wasn't the only place. It was like Logan Square and I don't know, the West Loop as well, right? Same thing, but more invested in that particular community than all the Black communities in the city. I mean, I won't say that government investments are spitting into the wind. I'm just saying they're a small part of the investments that are made in our neighborhoods. And although it's important to look at where government is spending money, we have to look at where the banks are investing money, for example, as well, because that's just incredibly disproportionate and discouraging. And reflects the pandemic racism in this country. How could you ever justify that one community in the city would get as much investment in home ownership, which is the critical way in which most people accumulate wealth, in one community as in all of the African-American communities in the city?
Okay, thank you. Well, we are at time. I really do appreciate all the time you've spent to answer all of our detailed questions. I'd like to thank once again Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle, Chief Information Officer Tom Lynch, Chief Technology Officer Hema Sundraham, Chief Data Officer Dessa Jepolo. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and we very much appreciate your time.
Can I say something in conclusion?
Oh, please.
Sure. All right, so I've been pretty emphatic about some of the challenges we face around racial equity in this country. Okay, so what can you all do? I mean, one of the things you can do is support not-for-profit agencies that are trying to address some of these challenges. I mean, the big one at the moment that I can think of is, for example, is the Greater Chicago Food Depository. There are tremendous demands on the food depository as a result of food insecurity driven by the economic collapse that's followed the pandemic. So, you know, if one of the things you could do is be supportive of community-based organizations, neighborhood organizations that are trying to address some of these challenges around equity that our city and our county face. And that's something you can do as individuals. You can volunteer to be helpful and supportive. So if you're going to talk about how how troubled things are, you should also tell people that there are things they can do to make a difference, and that's one of them. Okay, thank you.
And on a positive note.
Thank you. All right, well, I think we are ready to transition to the civic hacking portion of the evening. Ryan, you want to tell folks what that's all about?
So as I mentioned before, we will have some time to kind of go through our traditional agenda as well as do some introductions. And so if you are not a part of the Chi Hack Night Slack community, I suggest you join now so that way you can get that link to that Zoom meeting at slackme.chihacknight.org. And during this discussion, as well as introductions, we're also going to be announcing breakout groups. So chances for you to join discussion groups and standing breakout groups that are meeting at Chi Hack Night.
All right, well, thanks again, everyone. We'll be signing off now and taking things over to Slack, but we always like to end our broadcasts on one final statement, which is, you ready, Ryan?
I am ready.
All right, let's do it. Go forth and hack. All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you again.